It was the Great War, one of the fiercest wars in history, perhaps the greatest war in European history. Its spark ignited in Germany and spread throughout Europe, claiming millions of lives. 6 years of terror gripped the world. In this series, we recount the story of the war, World War II. On August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. World War I had begun. Germany tried to avoid a two-front war, so it hastened to eliminate the French army first. The Russian army was large but slow, and its equipment was outdated, not on par with the military might of the Germans and French. Therefore, the Germans rushed to defeat France first. The German plan was to attack France through Belgium, a plan prepared years in advance in case Germany confronted France. The Germans thought Belgium would not object to the use of its territory to attack France, but they were wrong. Belgium refused to allow the German army to cross its territory, and the Germans were forced to fight Belgium. The Belgians resisted, which disrupted the German plan, which relied on surprising France by attacking it through Belgian territory. The German army was able to crush the Russian army, and Russia was forced to cede part of its territory. The war dragged on, eventually turning into trench warfare. America entered the war late and supported France, in addition to British support, forcing the German army to retreat. The Russians, British, French, Americans, and their allies were on one side, and Germany, Austria, the Ottoman Empire, and their allies were on one side. Finally, Germany surrendered on November the 11th, 1918, and World War I ended for years later, until 1939. This war was the bloodiest of the 20th century. Its results were unpredictable and changed the world order. For Germany, humiliating terms were imposed upon it, in the form of the Treaty of Versailles. It lost part of its territory, its army was dismantled, and most of its soldiers and officers were demobilized. It was also forced to pay enormous reparations, the largest share of which went to France. This led to an unprecedented economic collapse in Germany, with soaring unemployment and inflation. Germany felt unjustly blamed, believing it hadn't fired the first shot. The German street was seething, and the most furious among them was a young corporal who had fought in World War I and been promoted to the rank of corporal, receiving the Iron Cross for his bravery and discipline. This young man was Adolf Hitler, the most prominent figure in World War II, who ignited its flames. Meanwhile, in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution erupted. The Tsar and his family were brutally overthrown, and Lenin became the first leader of Communist Russia. On January the 21st, 1924, Vladimir Lenin died. No one was worried about Joseph Stalin. No one knew that he was the successor to the leader of communism, the man who would rule Russia with an iron fist and break the back of the Nazi beast. The Ottoman Empire was divided between France and England, and later Mustafa Kemal Ataturk abolished the Islamic Caliphate on March 3, 1924, which had lasted for centuries. He became the first president of the modern Republic of Turkey, thus ending the story of the Ottoman Empire, which had spanned 6 centuries. As for the victors, despite the triumph of England and France, they emerged from this war exhausted, having lost millions of lives and depleted their national resources to finance the war. The Americans were among the least affected by this war. In Munich, a group emerged that adopted the swastika as its symbol. This symbol would one day fly over most European cities, but the German people did not accept the Nazi Party. No one expected it to become the most powerful party in Germany. The party spokesman, Adolf Hitler, gave speeches in Munich's beer halls. He was an eloquent speaker, and his words were like magic. On November the 8th, 1923, Hitler decided to lead a coup against the government in Munich with the help of General Lundorf, some of the elite, and members of the SA. He entered a government meeting and took several members hostage. The following day, Hitler called for. Berlin tried to negotiate with him, but the Bavarian government withdrew its support. He led protest marches in front of the Bavarian Ministry of Defense. Having belittled the government forces, shots were fired at these marches, and Hitler himself was wounded in the shoulder. His bodyguard was killed. He then fled to a house near the German-Austrian border, but was captured 2 days later. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, of which he served less than a year. After his release, he embraced democracy, touring Germany and delivering daily speeches, which he wrote and reviewed himself. However, until the late 1920s, the Nazi Party received only 5% of the vote. By 1930, this figure had risen to 20%, and by 1932, the Nazi Party had won a majority of seats in the Reichstag. In 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Upon assuming power, he immediately took measures to prepare for war, building roads and railways and secretly rearming Germany. Japan, which emerged as a powerful ally after World War I, relied on the resources of its neighbors, as it was a resource-poor country, strengthening its military capabilities, especially its naval arsenal, and returning to Germany. Hitler spoke in his speeches about revising the Treaty of Versailles and reducing unemployment. His greatest dream was to make all German speakers one nation. Therefore, on March 12, 1938, Austria was annexed to Germany after a referendum with an overwhelming majority, and German forces entered Austria without any resistance. The next target was Czechoslovakia, where he wanted to annex the Sudetenland, a region predominantly inhabited by Germans, under the pretext of German persecution there. On the night of September 29, 1938, the Munich Conference was held, attended by several European leaders at Hitler's invitation, including British Prime Minister Chamberlain, French Prime Minister Daladier, and Italian dictator Mussolini. The meeting concluded with Hitler receiving the Sudetenland in exchange for not annexing the rest of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain returned to London, waving a paper at the airport, declaring, "I have returned in peace," despite the presence of some opponents who refused to submit to Hitler, most notably Churchill, who would later become Prime Minister. However, Hitler did not keep his promise. A few months later, he annexed the remainder of Czechoslovakia. He had not made a single mistake in Moscow since Joseph Stalin seized power. He attempted to transform Russia into a major industrial power, but through an iron fist. Peasants were forced to work long hours, and factory workers were treated like slaves. On August 23, in 1939, Hitler sent his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, to conclude a non-aggression pact with Joseph Stalin. The world was astonished by this treaty. Hitler, who intended to set Europe ablaze, was making peace with his sworn enemy. However, he preferred to eliminate France first, and therefore wanted to secure the Eastern Front. The agreement stipulated that Hitler would seize Poland, reaching the capital, Warsaw, and then the Soviets would take over the rest of Poland. On September 1, 1939, Hitler ordered the attack on Poland. Despite objections from several of his generals, the British and French government sent Hitler an ultimatum to halt the aggression, but the FHRE had made an irrevocable decision. On September 3, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Poles fiercely resisted the Nazi army, but they relied on horses against tanks. The German army's attack was swift and unexpected. The Nazi army crushed the Polish army and continued its advance towards Warsaw. France mobilized its forces to attack Germany. On September 7, 1939, Joseph Durand led trained groups to attack Germany. He was a brilliant French officer and a hero of the First World War, but he later swore allegiance to Hitler and helped the Vichy government suppress the French resistance. He was captured after the liberation of France, tried, and executed by firing squad in 1945. The attack was limited and slow. It seems the French did not truly want to save Poland, but only wanted to put pressure on the Germans. The French relied on the Maginot Line, named after the French Minister of Defense, André Maginot. Construction continued from 1929 to 1938 and stretched along the border with Germany, through Alsace and Lorraine. However, the line was not completed all the way to the North Sea. The French believed the Germans couldn't attack through the Ardennes forest, and this was the trap Hitler set for them. On September the 20th, 1939, German aircraft brutally bombed Warsaw to break Polish resistance. On that day, Roosevelt addressed the American people, reaffirming the Neutrality Act passed by Congress to isolate the United States from events in Europe and Asia. According to the agreed plan, the Russians attacked Poland from the west, and Poland was now caught in the jaws of the monster. There were brutal mass executions of Polish officers and soldiers. General Hans Frank became governor of the German-controlled part of Poland and committed massacres and crimes against civilians, especially Jews. He was tried at Nuremberg and sentenced to death. Hundreds of thousands of Jews and Roma people were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. With each European country the Nazis conquered, the suffering of the Jews intensified. On April the 9th, 1940, Hitler decided to invade Norway to secure the flow of iron ore to Germany, which was being shipped from mines. Sweden and Norway, the Allies considered cutting off supply lines by seizing these ports and dealing a severe blow to the heart of German industry. However, Adolf Hitler made his decision quickly and managed to seize Norway in a swift war. Between November 1939 and March 1940, the Russians attempted to conquer Finland, but the Russian army suffered heavy losses, and the war ended with an agreement between Finland and the Soviet Union. Finland lost part of its territory, but retained its independence. This battle exposed the weaknesses of the Soviet army, which encouraged Hitler to later launch Operation Barbarossa. In the summer of 1940, the Four decided to invade France. He postponed the invasion of France several times, but in May 1940, he made his final decision. Hitler did not favor invading France through Belgium, as had been done in World War I. Instead, he wanted to attack France by crossing the Ardennes forest. The Germans would feign an attack on Belgium, prompting the Allies to send in their forces to repel the aggression, while the German army advanced through the Ardennes. This would allow Hitler to encircle. On May the 10th, 1940, German paratroopers landed in the Netherlands. Simultaneously, the German army attacked through the Ardennes forest. Elite British and French troops were sent to halt the German advance through Belgium. The Allies were trapped. German air power launched devastating attacks, destroying airfields and infrastructure in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands. Tanks and infantry surged forward relentlessly. The German army was like an unstoppable steam engine. In just 3 days, the Germans reached the Maginot Line, the seemingly impregnable fortress. In Britain, Winston Churchill, the Secretary of State for Continuity, succeeded Chamberlain as Prime Minister and was determined to fight to the bitter end. The French attempted a counter-attack with tanks led by Charles de Gaulle, but the German Air Force crushed those tanks. The Allied forces were now besieged in Belgium. The Belgian king had no choice but to surrender on May the 28th, 1940. However, approximately 400,000 men remained trapped in Hitler's grip. Most were evacuated along the coast, where the German forces abruptly halted on Hitler's orders. No one knows why Hitler made this strange decision. Was he paving the way for peace with Britain? Or had Field Marshal Göring assured him of the Luftwaffe's ability to crush them during the retreat? This remains a mystery. On June the 4th, the Germans entered Dunkirk and seized all the British military equipment left behind during the retreat. On June the 10th, Italy declared war on England, and France joined Hitler's side. The Luftwaffe continued bombing French cities, causing heavy losses. The road was now open for the Wehrmacht to reach Paris. Approximately 2 million French soldiers and thousands of officers were taken prisoner. France requested a ceasefire, and on June the 20th, 1940, Hitler arrived in France. On June the 22nd in June, the French surrender agreement was signed in the same carriage in which France had forced Germany to acknowledge its defeat in World War I. One of the terms of the armistice stipulated that France would hand over all Germans who had sought refuge there and opposed the Nazi regime. The French attempted to negotiate this condition, but Hitler was adamant. The Germans seized all the resources of the French army, and all French army depots and ports fell under Nazi control. France was forced to pay exorbitant reparations. Now the dictator had fulfilled his promise of revenge for the 1918 defeat. The Führer ordered the carriage in which the agreement was signed to be transported to Berlin, where it was destroyed shortly before the fall of the Reich. This was the only time Hitler visited France. He was impressed by French architecture and took several commemorative photographs. Hitler was hailed as the greatest military leader of all time, and his news was published in newspapers worldwide. He preferred to conclude a peace agreement with the British, but they refused. A formidable barrier stood between Britain and Hitler, a barrier far stronger than the Maginot Line, the English Channel. The German army at that time lacked sufficient naval vessels to transport troops and equipment, so there were fierce air battles between the two sides. Hitler wanted to destroy the Royal Air Force, but he failed. The British were the first to use radar to guide aircraft and anti-aircraft guns, causing a large number of German planes that attacked Britain to be shot down. Hitler postponed his plans to invade England, and this was his first failure, but he continued bombing the British, hoping that the raids launched by the German Luftwaffe on British cities would force the British to surrender or accept a treaty. In reality, the British people persevered amidst the rubble and destruction. Churchill addressed his people, urging them to stand firm for the sake of England. The Germans occupied many European countries. Jews were rounded up from all over Europe and taken to brutal concentration camps, or confined to cramped, impoverished neighborhoods. As soon as Roosevelt entered the White House for his third term, he encouraged increased military production. America was sending shipments continuously to support the British, but the ships were under attack. As the specter of German submarines threatened every ship in the ocean, Hitler wanted to secure more raw materials to keep the wheels of military production turning. So he decided to invade the Soviet Union. By invading the Soviet Union, he wanted to achieve three major objectives. The first objective was to obtain the raw materials and resources needed by the army and the people. The second was to cut off any hope Britain had of surrendering. The third was to deport the Jews to the Soviet Union. Hitler wanted to conquer Russia before winter, but he postponed the invasion to support his ally Mussolini.